Can you write a novel in Apple Notes? Before you answer, let's have a look at this guy. Ernest Hemingway, one of the best writers of all time, author of several best-selling books and even a Nobel Prize winner for literature in 1954. Do you think Hemingway would have debated, maybe even agonized over which app to use to write a book? He only wanted to write. And when you have that urge to write, you write on anything. You've got pen and paper, you use pen and paper. You don't have paper, you use a napkin. You don't have a napkin, you use your hand. Do you see what I mean? When you want to write, you write on anything you have at hand. And what is always on you? Your trusted Apple Notes. So in this video, we're going to explore ways to use Apple Notes to write a novel. It's not going to be a perfect process, but of course, if you are a professional writer, at some point you will have to hand over your work to an editor anyway. And if you want to self-publish, you can migrate all of your notes to Apple Pages, where you will have additional features to perfect your book. So, without further ado, let's jump into Apple Notes and let's get started. So here I am inside of Apple Notes, and I've created a special folder for my book, for this example. And in this folder, I've created a series of subfolders, which I'm going to use during this demonstration. So one folder is for my synopsis, from my timeline, a couple of folders for cards, one for drafts, one for characters, dialogues, locations, and of course there could be more depending on the type of book you want to write. In this case, for this novel, this is more than enough. So the first thing I want to do is to go into my synopsis folder, where I can start writing what this book is about. And really, using the snowball technique, I'm going to start with a very simple one-liner description of this book, which I've called V1, which, as you can see, is very simple. An unjustly incarcerated man escapes from prison and seeks revenge on the people who framed him. Super quick, one-liner, doesn't add too much to the story, but it's a good starting point. And then, using the snowball technique, I can then expand a little on this initial sentence, make it slightly longer. For example, in this second version, I've got now that Dante, a young merchant sailor, is falsely accused of treason and imprisoned in the Chateau d'If. And after a daring escape and discovering a treasure, he reinvents himself as the Count to exact revenge on those who betrayed him. So as you can see, in this second version, I've got the name of my protagonist, I've got his profession, I've got the name of the prison where he's going to be imprisoned, I've got the fact that he will discover a treasure, and also that he will reappear as an alter ego, as the Count. So I can continue in several iterations to build on my synopsis. I may have a V3 version, and then I can land on something that I consider a final version. Of course, you can progress with several versions, but at this point, with version 4, I'm okay. I've got my protagonist, I've got the name of the villains, the name of his fiancée, someone that will help him during the journey, and in general, the basic plot of my novel is now ready. And from this point, I can go on and start creating the additional details. The next thing to do is to create a sequence of events. This is really describing the plot from the beginning to the end. And many authors at this point work with physical cards. For example, Michael Crichton of Jurassic Park fame was very famous for using exactly this technique to write all of his books. He would start writing cards, he would leave all these cards in his office for days, maybe for weeks. And every day he would go in and remove things, add new things, reshape the sequence until he was very happy with it. And this is a very common technique, this incremental way of working, which is not only related to writing books. It is also very common in the music industry. The vast majority of songs that you like started as a series of very simple chords, maybe played on a guitar, and someone humming a melody. And over time, these things transform into a final product. In this basic folder for cards, I've got one note called sequence. And this one will act as a stack of physical cards. So just as you would write a series of cards and reshuffle them, you can do exactly the same here. And to the point that your plot and the development of the story is what you want. So you may start with a chapter about Marseille, maybe prologue to your novel, and then you go to the beginning, maybe there is an interlude, then a plot twist, and then the end. This is a very simple structure. Of course, in a real situation, it would be more chapters. But just for the sake of this demonstration, this is what you can do. And there is a reason why I'm creating these things as a checklist. And this is because checklist items can be rearranged. And this is really useful when you want to move chapters around in your story. For example, if I want the plot twist to be before the interlude, I can simply click on this one and drag it above. And now my story has a different shape. The next thing to do is to start with the development of your story, which means developing the characters, developing the plot, creating a timeline, and in general preparing all the elements that ultimately will flow into chapters of your book. For example, for the development of my novel, I can then go and maybe create in my characters folder a profile for Dante and for the other people. So if I go into my characters section here, as you can see, I've got a series of descriptions for each and every single one of the characters of my novel. So in this case, Dante is my protagonist. I jotted down a few basic traits of this person. Of course, you can go into greater detail depending on what type of novel you want to write. You could add motivation, you could add things that they like, what they look like. Maybe you can drag a photo in just to have a visual reference. But in my case, it was a very simple description just for the purpose of this demonstration. He's 19, he's prisoner 34 at Chateau d'If, and so on. I also have cards for other characters, such as Faria, for example, who's the guy he meets in prison, an intelligent and learned man who becomes Dante's mentor when they meet in prison. He teaches him everything he knows and bequeaths his vast fortune to him. He's 70 and is inmate 27. I've done the same thing for all the other characters, really. And again, you can go back and forth during your development phase and still, when you write, to add or remove details as you please, as you see fit. During development, I could have some locations. For example, in this folder here, I've got some notes about my locations in the book. So I've got Marseille, which is the city where the majority of action happens. And I've dragged in a picture of the port, more or less around the time the story unfolds. And as you can see, up here, there is this Chateau d'If, which is the prison. And I also have a little description of the prison, which can be used for reference while I'm writing. And I also have a folder for dialogue. Sometimes I may maybe wake up thinking of a really good exchange between two characters that I want to jot down and park it there until I can place it somewhere in my book. For example, I've got this one. Faria and Dante are in prison. Faria says, "In return for your help, I offer you something priceless. My freedom? No, freedom can be taken away, as you well know. I offer you my knowledge." A very nice exchange, which can definitely find a home in one of the chapters of the book. Did you recognize this book, by the way? It looks like a random example, but it's actually based on a very, very famous book, which I've loved. I read it when I was in London, and I had almost an hour in the tube every morning, a very long commute, which is normally something fairly boring. But when I was reading the book, I couldn't wait to take the tube in the morning to see what the Count was up to. So, if you've recognized it, let me know in the comments, and well done. I also have a folder for my timeline, where I can jot down the sequence of events. And my story in this case is a long story, starts in 1815 and ends almost 30 years later in 1844. So it kind of pays dividends to start jotting down some of the key dates. And this timeline, of course, can become much more intricate and detailed. Or you may have several timelines, for example, because there are several stories that at some point merge during the book. Once you have the structure in place, you can start writing single notes that represent single chapters in this sequence. So Marseille, for example, has a corresponding note here. One thing that can happen when you try and write a new chapter is the blank page syndrome. So you've got this blank piece of paper in front of you and you don't know where to start. This is very common. It happens to everybody at every level, from students to very famous authors. One potential way around that is that you start writing something that does not relate to your book. Maybe write how you feel, where you are, what the weather is like, whatever. What you had for breakfast. You start writing so the page starts filling up with a few lines. From that, you move to the general direction of the chapter, what you want to happen in this chapter. And based on that, with a sort of a snowball technique, you can then develop your chapter. It is much easier to start like this. And even if you are not happy with your chapter at the end of the day, it is still a very good starting point for tomorrow, because it's easier to revise something which is already there than to start from scratch. And one interesting thing that you can do is that you can actually link these words to the corresponding note. So if I double click on this to select and right click, I can choose add link and point to the card called Marseille, which is this one. Make sure you do not click on use note title and you click OK. And now, as you can see, it is underlined. This is a link. And when I click on Marseille, the corresponding note will be open for me to start writing. And you can add links to all of your cards for easier navigation. Now it's probably time to review your book. As Kurt Vonnegut once said, every sentence in your book should either advance action or reveal character. So it's very important to review your book and remove things that are not necessary for the progression of the story. Once you're ready to review your book, and authors do this on many occasions, it's almost a constant process of writing, reviewing, rewriting, and so on. You can, of course, click on the single links and go to the relevant note and review them one by one. Or there is a much better way of doing things, which is to have an automation collate and group all of your chapters in this specific order. And if I open my shortcuts and click on create a draft manuscript, you will see that a new file, a new note has been created, and that contains the title draft, my date, and the current time. And this is very useful because in the course of writing a book, you will create many drafts to review. So having something that has the date and the time is actually very useful. And then you have the list of chapters in the same order you had them in the sequence with their content. And this thing I can review as a single book. Now, this one is obviously shorter than a normal novel, but the principle still holds. It is just a way of seeing everything on the same page. And if I wanted to go back and change something, I could, of course, edit the single scenes, or maybe something which is more interesting, I could move things around. Maybe this chapter about the judge, I want to move here. And if I run the automation again, a new draft will be created, which has the judge at this position instead of being at the end. And this could help creating a story that flows better. Next is the editing phase. This normally involves an editor, so an external person that will read your draft and suggest changes. And to achieve that, you can leverage Apple Notes collaboration features. You can give them access to your manuscript, and they will be able to read, review, suggest changes, make comments, make additions for you to discuss. When I'm happy with my draft and it's time to maybe send it to an editor or someone that can help me review the draft, I can of course leverage the collaboration features of Apple Notes. If I go up here and I choose to share my notes and allow collaboration instead of just sending a copy, I can invite someone, let's say this person here. So now that my editor has received the link to this note, they can start collaborating with me. So as you can see here, this note is shared and there are already some comments on my manuscript. A great opening, maybe there is a question here, there is another one down here. So, these are standard collaboration features in Apple Notes which are actually really useful. And if I wanted to see with more clarity where all the comments are, I can click and choose Show Highlights. This way the text will be highlighted. This color is the stuff that I've added. And in this reddish color are the comments of my editor. So I can quickly scan through the text, spot them, and maybe respond and progress a conversation or update my book accordingly. Next phase is publishing. Now, this is the final phase of your project, and Apple Notes is not really suited for this. So my recommendation is that you migrate your draft to Apple Pages. In Pages, you will find additional tools to format your book and do the final touches before publication. So once I'm happy with the final version, I've removed all the comments and everything else, I can simply move to Pages, which will give me additional tools to perfect the formatting and layout of my book before publication. So I'm going to go to Share, open in Pages, and here we are. At the beginning, it doesn't look great, of course, because no formatting has ever been applied to this note. But I can, of course, start fixing it by changing the title and start changing some of the formatting here. Or maybe what I want to do is to split the chapter so that each one of them is on their own page. And to do that, I'm going to just select this text, copy, and then I'm going to press Command F to replace this, so I can paste the text that I've copied. And at the end, I'm going to add /n, which is the symbol of the end of the line. And I'm going to replace everything with /p, which is the symbol to create a new page. When I replace all, you can see that every chapter is on its own page. And I can then continue editing my book. Maybe I'm going to change this style to a heading, and maybe I'm going to change the text to, I don't know, a slightly different font. Whatever I like, really. You can just play with it until you're happy with the layout. And once you've done this to all of your book, maybe you change colors, do the formatting that you want, this one is going to be ready for publication on Amazon or any other website. This is, however, beyond the point of this video, so let's get back to me in video. Okay, now you have no excuses. You can finally write the novel you always wanted to write. And when it becomes a best-selling book, make sure you mention my name in your dedication. For now, thank you very much for watching, and see you soon.